welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. My name is Daniel Vega, and I used to work the night shift at the Clearwater Community Pool. It was an easy job. Most nights were quiet, the place was empty, and all I had to do was make sure no one snuck in after hours. Occasionally, I'd hear a splash, but it was usually just a bird landing in the water or a branch falling from one of the nearby trees. That was before the disappearances started. It began with Michael Travers, a regular at the pool. He swam every morning like clockwork, always doing laps at 5 a.m. sharp. The guy was ex-military, disciplined, and built like a damn statue. So when he didn't show up one morning, people noticed. At first, it wasn't a big deal. Maybe he slept in or had an early meeting. But when the day staff found his things in his usual locker, neatly folded and untouched, alarm bells went off. His car was still in the parking lot. His phone was in his gym bag. It was as if he'd just vanished. I was off that night, but when I came in for my shift, my manager, Kate, filled me in. "The police were here earlier," she said, looking rattled. "We checked the security footage, but..." She hesitated, biting her lip. "You should just watch it." She led me to the staff room, where an old monitor sat on a desk. She rewound the footage to around 5:10 a.m., the time Michael usually finished his first set of laps. The pool was empty except for him. He swam to the edge, took a deep breath, and rested his arms on the side. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then something changed. Michael stared down into the water. Not just a glance, but a full-on, unblinking stare. The footage was grainy, but I could see his mouth moving. Was he talking? A minute passed, then another. Suddenly, his head snapped forward, his whole body going rigid. His arms jerked awkwardly, as if they were being pulled by an invisible force. Then, in one fluid motion, he slipped back into the water, completely silent, no struggle, no splash. Just gone. The water barely rippled. I felt a chill creep up my spine. "What the hell is this?" I muttered. Kate shook her head. "We drained the pool, checked the filters, the pipes, everything. No sign of him. No blood, no torn fabric, nothing. It's like he just stopped existing." I watched the footage again, trying to make sense of it. The only strange thing, besides the fact that a grown man had apparently been swallowed by a swimming pool, was the reflection. When Michael was staring into the water, his reflection didn't quite match his movements. It was subtle, but I could see it. The timing was off just by a fraction of a second, like a lagging video. And when he jerked forward, the reflection didn't. I tried to push the incident out of my mind, but I couldn't shake the unease it left behind. The pool had always been calming to me. The soft echo of water lapping against the tiles, the steady hum of the filtration system. But that night, as I made my rounds, I felt different. I felt watched. At around 2 a.m., I heard a noise, faint but distinct. A whisper. I turned sharply, scanning the empty pool area. The overhead lights buzzed quietly. The water was still, its surface perfectly smooth. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was just spooked by the footage. Then I heard it again, soft, distant, like someone murmuring just below the surface. I stepped closer to the edge, my heart hammering. The pool was empty. I could see straight to the bottom, the dark tiles lined neatly. Then I saw my reflection. At first, everything looked normal. But as I leaned in, something felt off. The angle was wrong. The reflection's face was turned just a little too far toward me, its expression unreadable. A sickening realization settled in my gut. It was watching me. I staggered back, nearly losing my balance. My breath came in short gasps. My reflection was back to normal now, mirroring me perfectly. But I knew what I had seen. I grabbed my phone and took a shaky photo of the water. I wasn't sure why, maybe to prove to myself that I wasn't going insane. When I looked at the picture, my blood ran cold. My reflection was still there, but I wasn't. The next morning, I called in sick. I told Kate I had food poisoning, but the truth was, I couldn't bring myself to step foot near that pool again. I spent the day researching weird visual phenomena, trying to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe my tired brain had filled in the gaps with something impossible. But then I checked the news. Another disappearance. This time, it was a teenager from the next town over. She had been swimming at a private pool with friends when she wandered off. When they went looking for her, all they found was her phone, lying face down at the edge of the water. The last photo on her camera roll, picture of the pool. No people, just a reflection. I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was wrong. And then, that night, my phone buzzed with an emergency alert system notification. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Emergency alert. Do not look into reflective pools of water. If you see a distorted reflection, look away immediately. Report any reflection anomalies to local authorities. My stomach turned. This wasn't just happening here. It was everywhere. And whatever was looking back from those reflections, it wasn't us. I barely slept that night. Even after turning my phone face down, I could still see the emergency alert burned into my mind. The words replayed over and over, tangled with the images of Michael's unnatural disappearance and my own reflection watching me. I tried to convince myself that it was just paranoia. Maybe my reflection had been normal, and my brain had filled in something eerie because I was already scared. Maybe Michael's disappearance was just some kind of accident, a bizarre one, but explainable somehow. But deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. And the worst part? I had no idea what to do about it. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted, but I forced myself out of bed. I needed answers. I wasn't about to go back to the pool. Not after what I saw. But I had a feeling I wasn't the only one who had noticed something strange. I decided to call my coworker, Josh. He'd been working at Clearwater Community Pool longer than I had, and if anyone had seen something weird before, it would be him. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. His voice was groggy, like I had woken him up. Dan? What's up, man? Josh? I hesitated, unsure of how to start. Have you seen anything strange at the pool lately? There was a long pause. Then he sighed. You mean the reflections? My breath caught in my throat. You've seen them too? Dude! His voice dropped, suddenly serious. I've been seeing weird shit for weeks. We met up at a diner near the edge of town. It was the kind of place that always smelled like burnt coffee and old grease, but it was empty enough that we could talk without anyone overhearing. Josh looked rough, dark circles under his eyes, his usually messy hair even more unkempt than usual. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, staring into the cup like it might whisper something back to him. So, I started, tell me everything. Josh exhaled sharply. It started maybe 3 weeks ago, just little things at first. I'd be closing up, and I'd think I saw something move in the water out of the corner of my eye. But when I looked, it was just my reflection. Or at least, I thought it was. I gripped my coffee cup tightly. What do you mean? He rubbed his eyes. It was subtle. Sometimes I'd turn away, but out of the corner of my eye, I swear I'd see my reflection stay facing forward for just a second longer than it should. Other times, I'd swear the mouth moved, but mine didn't. A chill crawled up my spine. I had seen the same thing, but it wasn't just me, he continued. Kate mentioned something about it too. Said she thought she saw someone else's reflection in the pool when no one was there. It freaked her out so bad she started avoiding the water. I thought about Kate showing me the footage of Michael's disappearance. How she had hesitated before pressing play, like she didn't want to relive what she had seen. Josh leaned in closer. And then there was that one night, he muttered. That was when I knew something was seriously messed up. I swallowed. What happened? Josh hesitated, then lowered his voice. I was on shift alone, same as always. It was almost 3 a.m., and I was doing my last walkthrough. I stopped by the pool to check the water levels, and that's when I heard it. I nodded, already knowing what he was going to say. The whispering, his eyes widened slightly. "You heard it too?" I nodded again. Josh clenched his jaw. I don't know what it was saying, but it sounded like my own voice, just wrong, like an echo but off. I looked into the water and he stopped abruptly, staring at his hands. My stomach churned. "Josh," he swallowed hard. I don't know how to explain it. My reflection was there, but it wasn't doing what I was doing. It was just staring at me. A shiver ran down my spine, and then it smiled. I stared at him, my throat dry. "Smiled." Josh nodded stiffly. "Not a normal smile, Dan. It was wide. Too wide. And I swear to God, it whispered something. But it wasn't my voice anymore. It sounded deeper. A heavy silence settled between us. Finally, I asked, "What did you do?" "I ran." He laughed bitterly. "Didn't even clock out. Just grabbed my shit and left. Told Kate I was sick the next day." He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "And now? Now there's a goddamn emergency alert telling people not to look into pools. So yeah, I'd say I was right to be scared." My phone buzzed. I glanced down at the screen. Another emergency alert update. Update. Reflection incidents escalating. Do not engage with reflections in still water. If you experience visual anomalies, report immediately. Secure your homes. Avoid unnecessary exposure to reflective surfaces. I stared at the words, my pulse pounding. Josh read over my shoulder, muttering, "Jesus Christ, what do we do?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Josh didn't answer right away. He looked around the diner, as if expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Then, finally, he said, "We need to drain that goddamn pool." Neither of us wanted to go back, but we knew we had to. We arrived at Clearwater just after midnight. The building was locked up for the night, but Josh still had his keycard. He hesitated before swiping it, giving me a look that said, "Are we really doing this?" I nodded. We had to. The door clicked open and we stepped inside. The air was thick with chlorine, but there was something else too. A wrongness that made my stomach turn. The pool stretched out before us, eerily still. The overhead lights reflected off the surface like a mirror. We walked forward, slow and cautious. The silence pressed in around us, and then a ripple. A single, gentle ripple disturbed the surface. Josh and I froze. The water settled again. But something was different. Our reflections were there, but they weren't us. They were watching, and they were smiling. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Josh and I stood at the edge of the pool, staring at our reflections, except they weren't our reflections. They were watching us, their faces twisted into something just slightly off. The movements were just a fraction too slow, like a lagging video feed. And then there were the smiles, too wide, too knowing. Josh took a step back and I followed instinctively. The moment we moved, so did our reflections, only they didn't step back. They leaned forward, grinning. "Dan," Josh said quietly, not looking away from the water, "we need to go." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. "Yeah." We turned at the same time and walked away, moving slowly, resisting the urge to run. The weight of something unseen pressed against my back, like I could feel them still watching us. I reached for the door handle. The lights flickered. The whispering started again. Josh flinched, his breath hitching. "Shit," he muttered under his breath. "Do you hear that?" I did. The whispers weren't loud, but they were layered. Overlapping voices, all speaking at once. A sound that wasn't quite human. Came from everywhere. From nowhere. From the water. I made the mistake of looking back. The reflections were still there. But now they were closer. Neither of them were standing at the edge of the pool anymore. They had moved forward onto the water, standing on the surface like it was solid ground. My stomach twisted. That was impossible. Josh saw it too. He grabbed my arm. "We need to leave. Now." I didn't argue. We burst through the door and into the night, slamming it shut behind us. The humid summer air hit my skin, but it did nothing to stop the deep, icy fear lodged in my chest. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath. Finally, Josh spoke. "We're not coming back here. No argument from me," I muttered, running a hand over my face. Josh reached into his pocket, pulled out his keycard, and snapped it in half. The plastic cracked loudly in the quiet night. He let the pieces fall to the ground. I stared at him. "You sure about that?" He nodded. "If they want someone to babysit that thing, they can find somebody else." I didn't blame him. I didn't even bother clocking out. I just got in my car and drove home, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The emergency alert woke me up. My phone buzzed aggressively against my nightstand, the screen glowing in the darkness. I sat up, groggy, still shaken from earlier. The room was dead silent except for the vibration of my phone. Then I saw the text. "Emergency alert. Avoid reflective surfaces. Stay away from still water. If you encounter a reflection that does not match your movements, look away immediately. Report incidents to local authorities." My stomach turned. This was real. It wasn't just the pool. I checked the time, 3:12 a.m. A few minutes later, another buzz. This time, a news update. I clicked it with shaky hands. Breaking news. Unexplained disappearances linked to public pools and water sources. The article was short, mostly speculation, but it mentioned multiple missing persons cases. Some from our town, others from surrounding areas. The disappearances followed the same pattern. Personal belongings left behind. No signs of a struggle. Some people had been seen staring into pools, lakes, or even deep puddles just before vanishing. The last line made my blood run cold. Officials urged the public to avoid looking into reflective bodies of water until further notice. The cause of these incidents is still unknown. I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. This wasn't just paranoia. It wasn't just us. Something was happening, and the people in charge knew. Morning came, but the unease didn't fade. If anything, it got worse. The emergency alert had spread. It was on every local news channel, every social media feed. Videos were popping up, people filming their own reflections doing things they shouldn't be doing. Some were fake, obvious edits, people messing around for views, but some felt real. One showed a woman filming herself in her bathroom mirror. First, nothing seemed off. She spoke directly to the camera, explaining that she'd heard about the emergency alert and wanted to test it herself. She waved. The reflection waved back. She touched her face. So did the reflection. But then, just for a split second, the reflection's mouth moved. The woman hadn't said anything. She didn't notice at first, but when she replayed the footage, she started screaming. The video ended abruptly. The comments were filled with people saying it was fake, but a few claimed they'd experienced similar things. Another post had security footage from an apartment complex showing a man bending down to tie his shoe near a puddle. His reflection, however, didn't move. It just stood there watching him. Then, without warning, the reflection reached out. The man never saw it. The video cut off just before he disappeared. I shut my phone off. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just pools anymore. It was anywhere there was still water. I decided to visit Kate. If anyone had more information, it was her. Her house was across town, a modest little place with a well-kept lawn. I knocked twice, glancing over my shoulder like something might be lurking behind me. When she opened the door, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't even say hello, just pulled me inside and locked the door behind me. "You've seen them, haven't you?" she asked. I swallowed. "Yeah," she nodded stiffly. "They're getting worse. I saw the news," I said. "This is bigger than just our pool." She let out a humorless laugh. "You think?" She gestured to her kitchen table. Papers were spread out across it. Printouts of missing persons reports, news articles, screenshots of security footage. "They've been covering this up," she said. "For years." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" Kate ran a hand through her hair. "This isn't new, Dan. These disappearances, they go back decades. I've been digging. Every few years, clusters of people vanish near lakes, rivers, pools. No bodies, No evidence. Just gone. A sick feeling curled in my stomach. She pointed to a grainy, black and white photo at the center of the table. It showed a lake. First, it looked normal, but then I saw it, just at the water's edge. A figure, standing on the surface, watching. I looked at Kate. What the hell is happening? She met my gaze, her expression grim. I think they've been waiting, she said. The overhead light flickered, and from the kitchen sink, I heard a whisper. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The whispering from the sink was soft, just a murmur, like someone speaking from far away. But the tone, it wasn't right. It was layered, like multiple voices speaking at once, slightly out of sync. Kate slowly turned toward the faucet. I could see the pulse in her throat, her body tensed like a deer frozen in headlights. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. She grabbed a dish towel and threw it over the sink, covering the stainless steel basin. The whispering stopped immediately. A long silence stretched between us. Then she exhaled, rubbing her hands over her face. Jesus Christ, I forced myself to speak. How long has this been happening? Kate shook her head. Started last night, after I left the pool. I thought about my own reflection, the way it had watched me, smiled at me, and I felt my stomach twist. It's not just pools, I said. It's any still water. Kate nodded grimly. I've been thinking about that too. If it was just pools, the emergency alert wouldn't be so widespread. I glanced at the papers scattered across the table again. My eyes landed on an old newspaper clipping, yellowed and faded. Missing swimmers at Black Lake. No bodies found. I frowned. What's this? Kate pulled it toward her. Black Lake, 1978. 7 people disappeared in one summer. All of them were last seen near the lake's edge. No bodies. No explanations. She tapped the paper. I found similar reports from different places, different years. 1991, 2003, 2016. It happens in patterns, Dan. A cold realization settled over me. And now it's happening here. She nodded. A deep, sickening dread built in my chest. We need to tell someone, I said. Kate let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Tell who? The cops? You think they're gonna believe, hey, reflections are stealing people? She shook her head. They'll either ignore us or throw us in a psych ward. I swallowed. She was right. The emergency alert meant someone knew what was happening. But whoever was behind it wasn't giving people the full story. What about the government? I asked. This has to be bigger than us. Maybe we can find out who sent the alert. Kate hesitated, considering it. Maybe, but we'd need access to something big. Classified records, restricted files. Neither of us had that kind of access, but I knew someone who might. Josh. I called him as soon as I left Kate's house. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Dude, he said, voice tight. Where the hell have you been? I need to talk to you, I said. In person. There was a pause. Then he exhaled sharply. Yeah, okay. Meet me at my place. Josh lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. The blinds were drawn, and when I knocked, he opened the door just enough to peek out before quickly ushering me inside. The place was a mess. Takeout containers, scattered papers, an empty coffee cup tipped over on the counter. Josh himself looked even worse. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair disheveled. Have you slept? I asked. Josh shook his head. No, he gestured for me to sit. You saw the alerts? Yeah. He ran a hand through his hair. Something's happening, man. It's not just here. I've been looking online. Other states, other towns. People are disappearing near lakes, rivers, pools. And the ones who don't disappear. He swallowed. Some of them are seeing things, hearing things, like us. I said. Josh nodded. I took a deep breath. Listen, Kate's been digging into this. She found old reports. This has been happening for decades. But someone keeps covering it up. Josh leaned forward. You think it's the government? I don't know, I admitted. But whoever sent that emergency alert, they know more than we do. And we need to find out what. Josh rubbed his face. Damn it. He was quiet for a moment, then muttered, "I might know someone." I looked at him sharply. "Who?" Josh hesitated. "My uncle. He works with emergency management. He doesn't talk about his job much, but I know he deals with classified stuff. Stuff they don't want the public to know." My pulse quickened. "Do you think he knows about this?" Josh shrugged. "If the government is involved, maybe." He pulled out his phone. "I can call him, see if he'll talk." He dialed. The phone rang once, twice, then someone picked up. "Josh." The voice was rough, tired. "Hey, Uncle Ray, I need to ask you something." A long pause. Then, in a quieter voice, Ray said, "You've seen them, haven't you?" A chill ran down my spine. Josh's face paled. "You do know what's happening." Ray exhaled. "Listen to me very carefully. You and your friend stay away from water. Stay away from mirrors. Avoid anything that can hold a reflection." My mouth went dry. "What are they?" I asked. Ray hesitated. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "We don't know." I exchanged a look with Josh. "You have to know something," Josh pressed. Ray sighed. "There are old reports, very old. Some describe them as water shadows. Others call them echoes. But the truth is, nobody knows where they come from." He paused. "They don't just copy you, Josh. They replace you." I felt my stomach drop. "Replace?" Ray's voice was grim. "The people who vanish? The ones who disappear near still water? Some of them come back." A silence stretched between us. "But they aren't themselves anymore," Ray continued. "They look the same, sound the same, but something's wrong." I thought about Michael, how his belongings were left behind, how no one saw him leave. Had he been replaced? Ray's voice lowered. "The emergency alert is a last resort. The government can't stop them. The only thing they can do is warn people." My hands were clammy. "So what do we do?" Ray hesitated. "You run." The call cut out. Josh and I sat in stunned silence. Then, from the bathroom down the hall, a slow, deliberate drip. We turned toward the sound. Another drip, then a whisper. The air in the apartment suddenly felt too still, too heavy. Josh's voice was barely a whisper. "Dan, we're not alone." I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. Then, from the darkened hallway, a shadow stepped forward. Josh and I sat frozen, barely breathing. The figure in the hallway didn't move. It was just a shape at first, a tall, human-like silhouette standing in the dim light. Then it took a step forward. I sucked in a sharp breath. It looked like Josh. No, not exactly like him. It was the same height, the same build. But its face, something was wrong with its face. The eyes were a little too wide. The skin looked stretched too tightly over its bones, almost like it wasn't meant to fit. And it was smiling, a slow, creeping, unnatural smile. "Josh!" I barely recognized my own voice. "Do you see that?" Josh's hands were clenched into fists. "Yeah." The thing took another step. It moved smoothly, its footsteps eerily silent against the floor. Then it spoke, but it didn't sound like Josh. Not really. The voice was too flat, too hollow, like someone imitating human speech but missing the little nuances that made it real. "Where are you going?" it asked. Neither of us answered. Josh grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "We need to get out of here." I nodded. Slowly, carefully, we inched toward the front door, never taking our eyes off the thing in the hallway. It didn't move to stop us, just stood there, still grinning. My fingers brushed the doorknob, and then the bathroom light flickered on. For a split second, I saw it clearly. The bathroom mirror reflected the hallway, and in that reflection, there was another Josh standing behind the first one. But this one wasn't smiling. It was staring directly at me. Then the light flickered off again. The thing in the hallway took a sudden, jerking step forward. Josh yanked the door open and we bolted. We ran to my car, barely stopping to breathe. Josh jumped into the passenger seat while I fumbled with my keys. I could feel it behind us. Not footsteps, not breathing, but a presence. I got the door unlocked, slammed it shut behind me, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Josh was already looking over his shoulder. "It's still standing there." I risked a glance. The thing was standing on the porch now, still watching us. still smiling. But it wasn't alone. There was another one now, and another. 3 figures stood in the dim glow of the apartment's outdoor light. Their shapes were human, but their faces were wrong. They weren't just reflections anymore. They were spreading. "Go," Josh said, voice tight. I floored the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. The figures on the porch didn't chase us. They just stood there, watching until they disappeared into the distance. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. "What the hell is happening?" Josh exhaled sharply, rubbing his hands over his face. "I don't know. But if my uncle's right, this isn't just about disappearing people. It's about them coming back." I thought about Michael, thought about how no one saw him leave. What if Michael never actually left? What if the thing that came back wasn't him? We drove aimlessly for a while, neither of us knowing what to do. The emergency alerts kept coming, popping up on our phones every half hour. Emergency alert update. Reflective surfaces remain dangerous. Avoid mirrors, windows, still water. Do not engage with reflections that do not match your movements. If you suspect someone has been replaced, do not confront them. Report to authorities. I read the last line 3 times. Do not confront them. Josh read it too. They know. I nodded, my stomach twisting. They know people are being replaced, and they're telling us to just report it. But to who? Josh muttered. He was right. Who the hell was actually in charge of this? Who were we supposed to call? Police? The government? What would they even do? I clenched my jaw. We need answers, Josh exhaled. Then we need to find my uncle. Ray's house was a half-hour drive out of town, in a quiet rural area surrounded by trees. By the time we got there, the sky was starting to lighten, early dawn creeping in. Josh knocked hard on the door. No answer. He knocked again. "Uncle Ray, it's me." Still nothing. A sick feeling crept into my stomach. Josh tried the doorknob, turned easily. The door was unlocked. I didn't like that. We exchanged a look. Then carefully we stepped inside. The house was dark, the air thick with stillness. Something was wrong. Josh called out again, quieter this time. "Uncle Ray." No answer. Then we heard it. Faint, distant whispering. Not from inside the house, from outside. Josh and I turned slowly toward the back door. It had a large window, and beyond it was Ray's backyard. A small pond sat at the far end of the property, and someone was standing at the water's edge. A man, motionless, staring into the pond. I didn't have to ask. It was Ray. Josh's breath hitched. Shit. Without thinking, he moved toward the door. I grabbed his arm. "Josh, wait," but it was too late. Josh yanked the door open and ran outside. "Uncle Ray." Ray didn't move, didn't turn. He just kept staring into the water. I followed, my pulse pounding. "Josh, don't." Josh grabbed Ray's shoulder. "Uncle Ray." Ray finally moved. Slowly, he turned his head toward us. His expression was blank, his eyes dark and glassy, almost too reflective in the low light. And then he spoke, but his mouth didn't move. I heard the words inside my head. "It's too late." A ripple spread across the pond, and something rose from the water. A ripple. That was all it took to make my blood run cold. The surface of the pond trembled, and something rose from beneath it. At first, it looked like just a shape, a dark, shifting outline emerging from the still water. But as it pulled itself up, I realized it wasn't just a shadow. It was a man, copy of Ray. Josh staggered back, his breath hitching. "What the?" The second Ray emerged fully, water dripping from its clothes, its face wrong, just like the thing in Josh's apartment. The eyes were too reflective, the skin stretched too tight. It moved slowly, unnaturally, like a puppet learning how to walk. And then the first Ray, the one standing next to Josh, spoke. "It's too late." I didn't see his lips move, but I heard the words, clear as day, inside my head. Then his body twitched. His arms moved too fluidly, like they weren't controlled by muscles and bones, but by something else entirely. Josh was still frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. But I wasn't waiting around. I grabbed his arm and yanked him back just as the first Ray lunged. Shouldn't have moved that fast. 1 second it was standing there, stiff and lifeless. The next, it was coming at us full speed. Josh snapped out of it and ran. We bolted toward the house, slamming the back door shut behind us. I turned the deadbolt just as something slammed into the other side. Then silence. Josh's breathing was ragged. What the hell was that? I didn't answer. I was staring at the window. Through the glass, I could see them. Both rays. They stood side by side at the edge of the pond, motionless. Identical. Josh ran a shaking hand through his hair. That wasn't my uncle. No, I said quietly. Josh swallowed hard. We need to call someone. I grabbed my phone. My fingers hovered over the emergency number, but I hesitated. Who do we even call? Would the police believe us? Would anyone? I looked back at the figures by the pond. They hadn't moved. They were just watching. Josh's voice was unsteady. My uncle said the government knew about this. Maybe we need to go straight to them. I nodded slowly. Maybe. Then the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, and from somewhere inside, a drip, then another. Josh grabbed my arm. Dan, the bathroom. We turned at the same time. The bathroom door was open just a crack. The air felt thick, too still, too heavy. Then we heard it, a whisper, soft like someone mimicking a human voice. Josh and I didn't move. Then slowly, the door creaked open. A figure stepped out. At first, all I saw were the feet. Bare, damp. Then the rest of the body followed. It was me, a second me, dripping wet. Its eyes were wide, glassy, reflecting just a little too much light. It smiled. Then it spoke. Where are you going? Josh grabbed my wrist. We're leaving. Now. I didn't argue. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. Josh, I know, just drive. I barely managed to start the engine before I slammed the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the pavement as we tore out of there. In the rearview mirror, I saw them, the two rays, the second me, all of them standing perfectly still in the driveway, watching us leave. Josh was gripping the dashboard so tightly his knuckles turned white. Where are we going? I shook my head. I don't know, but I did know one thing. We had to get as far away from them as possible. We drove in silence for a while. The only sound was the occasional emergency alert buzzing from my phone. I glanced at it. Emergency alert update. Avoid reflections. Avoid still water. Do not trust anyone acting unusual. If you see yourself, do not engage. My throat tightened. If you see yourself. I locked my phone. Josh finally spoke. His voice was quiet. If my uncle's really gone, I didn't know what to say. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. We can't be the only ones seeing this. There has to be someone out there who knows what to do. I thought about that. If the government had sent the emergency alert, someone had to know what was happening. But they weren't telling people the full story. Why? Were they trying to cover it up? Or did they just not know how to stop it? We need to find someone who can actually help, I said. Josh nodded. But how? I hesitated. Then I remembered something. There's one place we haven't checked. Josh frowned. What? I tightened my grip on the wheel. The Emergency Alert Center. Josh stared at me. You're talking about the EOC? The Emergency Operations Center. The place where government agencies coordinated disaster responses. Josh let out a shaky breath. Dude, that's a restricted facility. I know. And you think they're just gonna let us walk in and ask about the water people? No, I admitted. But we don't have a choice. Josh was silent for a long time. Then finally he exhaled. Fine, let's do it. I nodded. And in the rearview mirror, just for a second, I thought I saw something move. A shadow in the back seat. I turned my head, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. At least, I thought there wasn't. The road stretched ahead of us, empty and dark. Josh sat tense in the passenger seat, his fingers tapping against his knee. Every so often, he glanced behind us, as if expecting to see something trailing in the shadows. Are you sure about this? His voice was quiet, like he was afraid of being overheard. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. If the government is sending these alerts, someone at the Emergency Operations Center knows what's going on. We need to find them. Josh exhaled and rubbed his face. Yeah, But that place isn't open to the public. I tightened my grip on the wheel. He was right. The EOC wasn't a place you could just walk into. It was a heavily secured government facility, one that, under normal circumstances, was used to coordinate disaster responses. But this wasn't a normal disaster, and I wasn't planning on walking in through the front door. Josh shifted in his seat. So what's the plan? I hesitated. We find a way in, Josh scoffed. Great plan, I sighed. Look, I don't know, okay? But we don't have any other leads. If we just sit around and wait, we'll end up like your uncle. Josh flinched at that, and I instantly regretted saying it. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, finally, he muttered, "Yeah, okay." We drove in silence after that. The Emergency Operations Center was located about an hour outside of town, deep in a heavily secured government complex. As we got closer, the roads became more deserted. No other cars, no streetlights, just empty stretches of pavement disappearing into the dark. I checked the dashboard clock. 3:42 a.m. Josh shifted uncomfortably. It's too quiet. I nodded. Something about this stretch of road felt wrong. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, but a small, creeping paranoia twisted in my gut, like something was supposed to be there. I turned my attention back to the road, and that's when I saw the figure, standing directly ahead of us. Shit! I slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. The car lurched to a stop, the headlights illuminating the figure in the distance. A man. He was standing in the middle of the road, motionless. His clothes were soaking wet. His face was shadowed, but something about the way he stood made my stomach turn. Josh stiffened. Is that? I swallowed hard. I don't know. Neither of us moved. Then the figure took a step forward. Josh's breath hitched. No. Nope. Hell no. Go. I didn't argue. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched again as the car shot forward. For a split second, I saw the figure's face. It was me, perfect copy, and it was smiling. Then the car hit it, or at least it should have. The moment the car made contact, the figure vanished. Like mist, like it had never been there at all. Josh was breathing hard. What the hell? I didn't answer. I just kept driving. The trees thickened as we neared the EOC. Ahead, I could see the entrance, a heavy, gated security checkpoint. Beyond that, the facility stretched into the distance, a massive concrete structure surrounded by high fences and floodlights. Josh sat up straighter. You seriously think we can get in? I took a deep breath. Not through the front. I pulled the car off the road, parking a safe distance away from the checkpoint. The last thing we needed was to draw attention. Josh ran a hand through his hair. So what now? I pointed toward the trees. We go in from the side. Josh stared at me like I was insane. You want to sneak into a government facility? I nodded. Unless you have a better idea. Josh let out a slow, frustrated breath. Then, reluctantly, he unbuckled his seatbelt. Fine, but if we get shot, I'm haunting you. We moved carefully through the trees, staying low and avoiding the floodlights. The fence was massive, at least 12 feet high, topped with barbed wire. Josh scowled. Now what? I pointed to a maintenance section where the fence met the side of the building. There was a gap in the wire. Not big, but big enough. Josh shook his head. You've done this before, haven't you? No comment. We climbed. It wasn't easy, but we managed to haul ourselves over the fence without getting sliced to pieces. As soon as we hit the ground, we ducked into the shadows. The EOC was quiet. Too quiet. No guards. No movement. Just the distant hum of electricity and the occasional flicker of a security camera. Josh whispered, "Why does this place feel abandoned?" I didn't have an answer. Something about the silence was wrong. We crept along the side of the building, looking for a way in. Finally, we found a service door unlocked. Josh hesitated. That's not a good sign. I ignored him and pushed it open. We stepped inside. The interior of the EOC was dimly lit. Emergency lights flickered along the hallways, casting long shadows. The place felt deserted. Josh whispered, "Where the hell is everyone?" I had no idea. We moved cautiously, our footsteps barely making a sound against the tile floor. I checked my phone. No signal. Figures. Then we saw it. The control room. The door was slightly ajar. A faint glow coming from inside. Josh and I exchanged a look. Then carefully we pushed the door open. The room was filled with screens. Dozens of live feeds from security cameras around the country. And every single one was showing the same thing. Bodies. People standing motionless near pools, lakes, fountains, any body of water. All of them staring at their reflections. Josh muttered, "Jesus Christ." Then I noticed something else. One of the screens showed us a security feed from inside the EOC. A live feed. Josh's eyes widened. "That's us." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Then the camera feed glitched. For a split second, our images on the screen were wrong. Josh's reflection was smiling. Mine was watching me. Then the screen went black. And from somewhere inside the building, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." Josh and I froze. The whisper had come from inside the building. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. The control room was empty, just rows of monitors and the faint hum of servers. But that voice, it hadn't been over the speakers. It had been right behind us. Josh swallowed hard. "Tell me you heard that." I nodded. We weren't alone. The room suddenly felt colder. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Josh shifted uneasily. "What do we do?" I forced myself to think. We needed information. If the government was sending these emergency alerts, then someone at the EOC knew what was happening. And if they'd abandoned this place, that meant whatever was going on was bigger than we thought. I turned back to the monitors. Most of them had gone dark, but one was still active, showing lines of text. Josh stepped closer, his breath uneven. "What is that?" I scanned the screen. The text was scrolling automatically, line after line of coded information. But among the gibberish, I caught a few phrases. "Incident report. Unknown phenomenon detected. Memetic entities confirmed. High-risk zones. All still water sources. Replication process. Unknown. Do not engage. Do not trust reflections." A cold weight settled in my stomach. Josh read over my shoulder, his voice barely above a whisper. "Memetic entities?" I scrolled down. More reports. More warnings. But no solutions. No explanations. Then, near the bottom, a final entry. "Evacuation protocol initiated. Site compromised." I exhaled shakily. "They left." Josh frowned. "Yeah, but why?" Before I could answer, the lights flickered, and a wet footstep echoed in the hall. Josh and I spun toward the door. Another footstep. Slow. Deliberate. Something was walking toward us. Josh grabbed my wrist. "We need to go." I didn't argue. We bolted out of the control room and into the dimly lit hallway. The emergency lights flickered overhead, casting broken shadows on the walls. Somewhere behind us, we heard a drip, then another, then a whisper. It was our voices. I didn't stop to listen. We ran. The EOC was a maze of empty offices and abandoned workstations. Papers were scattered across desks, chairs knocked over like people had left in a hurry. Josh kept glancing behind us. "Where the hell are the exits?" "I don't know." I skidded to a stop at a T-junction, trying to remember the layout from the security feeds. "I think the main doors are." A shadow moved. Josh grabbed my arm. "Left. Go left." We turned down another hallway. Ahead, I spotted a heavy metal security door. Relief surged through me. There, we sprinted toward it, and then I saw the puddle, a thin layer of water seeping under the door. Josh's steps faltered. "Dan!" I didn't stop. We had to get out. I reached for the handle, and something grabbed my wrist. Cold, wet, strong. I jerked back as a hand emerged from the puddle, fingers curling around my arm. Yanked hard. I stumbled forward, my foot slipping on the wet floor. For a split second, my reflection in the water twisted, changing. It looked at me, smiled. Josh grabbed me, pulling me away. "Move!" I hit the ground as the hand dissolved back into the puddle. The water rippled violently, as if something was still beneath it. Then it stilled. Josh hauled me to my feet. "Forget the door. Find another way. I didn't argue. We ran again, turning down another corridor. The hall seemed endless, stretching in all directions like the building was warping around us. Then a figure stepped into view ahead of us. Josh skidded to a stop. No, it was me, another copy. Soaking wet, eyes wide and glassy, it stood perfectly still, watching us, then slowly tilted its head. Josh grabbed my shoulder. Back, go back. But when we turned, another figure was there. This one looked like Josh, dripping, smiling, waiting. My pulse thundered in my ears. We were trapped. Josh was breathing hard. What do we do? I forced myself to think. Reflections. Water. That's how they appear. But this place didn't have mirrors or pools. So how had they? The security cameras. I stiffened. Josh noticed my expression. Dan, the cameras, I whispered. They must be using them. Josh's face paled. You think you shouldn't have come here. The voice came from both copies. At the same time, perfectly synchronized. A chill ran down my spine. Josh grabbed my wrist. We need to go now. I scanned the hallway, looking for an escape. The copies weren't moving yet. They were just watching, testing us. Then, behind the copy of me, I spotted it, a stairwell. I yanked Josh's arm. This way. We sprinted past the figures, keeping our eyes forward. We didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge them. We just ran. The stairwell door slammed open. We took the steps two at a time, descending into the darkness below. The lower level was colder. The air felt damp, heavy. Josh whispered, "What is this place?" I wasn't sure, but the hallway ahead led deeper into the facility. I checked behind us. No one. Yet, Josh exhaled. Are we even going the right way? I hesitated. Then I noticed something, a map mounted on the wall. I stepped closer, scanning it quickly. Then I found what I was looking for. Loading Bay 2, an exit. Josh saw it too. Bingo! We followed the corridor, moving fast but careful. Every turn, every shadow felt like it was watching us. Then ahead, a heavy metal garage door. I rushed to it, searching for a panel. There, a keypad. Josh groaned. Tell me you know the code. I didn't, but before I could answer, something pounded on the door. From the outside, we both jumped back. Josh whispered, "Who the hell?" Another pound. Then a voice, low, desperate. "Let me in." Josh and I locked eyes. The pounding continued, harder, faster. Then the voice changed. It became distorted, wet. "Let me in." Josh took a shaky step back. "Dan, that's not." The lights flickered, and the voice spoke again. "You shouldn't have come here." The pounding on the door didn't stop. Fists hammering against metal. Each impact sent a deep vibration through the air, rattling the heavy garage door as if whatever was on the other side was growing impatient. "Let me in." Josh backed away, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Dan, we need to go. Now." I was frozen. Every instinct told me that whatever was outside that door was wrong, not human. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the pounding stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Josh whispered, "Did it leave?" A deep, horrible stillness settled over the room. Then a drip, slow, rhythmic, coming from above us. I looked up, and my stomach dropped. The ceiling was covered in water. It pooled along the panels like an upside-down lake, rippling and shifting, reflecting the dim emergency lights in distorted waves. And something was moving inside it. I grabbed Josh's arm. "Run!" We bolted just as the first hand emerged from the watery ceiling, reaching down toward us. We sprinted back into the hall, my mind racing. The creatures, whatever they were, weren't just in still water. They were in any water, including the pipes, the sprinkler system. Josh was right behind me. Where the hell do we go? I scanned the hallway, searching for something, anything, that could get us out. The facility was a maze of dimly lit corridors, each one stretching endlessly into the dark. Then I saw it, a sign. Evacuation tunnel. Authorized personnel only. I grabbed Josh's sleeve, pointing. There, we ran. The emergency tunnel door was marked with a keypad lock. But before Josh could panic, I grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and swung it with everything I had. The panel shattered. The door clicked open. I yanked it open and we dove inside. The tunnel was narrow and low, with exposed pipes running along the ceiling. The walls were concrete, rough and damp with condensation. Josh bent over, hands on his knees. "Please tell me this leads outside." "It has to." I wasn't sure if I believed that. We kept moving, our footsteps echoing through the corridor. The only light came from dim emergency strips along the floor, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Josh whispered, "You think those things can follow us down here?" I didn't answer. I already knew the answer, because somewhere in the distance I heard it. A single footstep, then another, and another, slow, steady, following us. Josh tensed. "Tell me that was you." It wasn't. I grabbed his arm. "Go, go." We ran. The tunnel stretched on for what felt like miles, turning sharply at odd angles. The air was growing thicker, damp with an unpleasant, stale smell. Then, ahead of us, a metal ladder, leading up to a hatch. Josh let out a breath of relief. "That's gotta be an exit." We didn't slow down. Josh climbed first, grabbing the rungs 2 at a time. I followed close behind, heart hammering. The sound of footsteps behind us was getting closer. Josh reached the hatch, grabbing the handle locked. "No, no, no." He yanked on it, but it wouldn't budge. It stuck. I scrambled up beside him, bracing myself against the wall. Then I slammed the fire extinguisher against the lock. Once, twice. The third time, it broke. The hatch burst open, flooding the tunnel with cold, fresh air. Josh hauled himself up, then grabbed my wrist, pulling me after him. We tumbled out onto asphalt. I gasped. The night air was freezing against my sweat-soaked skin. We had made it outside, but we weren't safe yet. We had surfaced in an abandoned parking lot. The EOC loomed behind us, its dark windows reflecting the moonlight like empty eyes.
Josh spuni na circle.
Where the hell are we? I had no idea. The area was eerily quiet. No cars, no people, just the distant sound of dripping water. I turned toward the hatch and froze. The reflection. The hatch had landed at an angle, creating a shallow puddle. And in that puddle, there was something watching us. It looked like me, but its eyes were wrong. Josh saw it too. "Dan?" The thing in the reflection grinned. Then it moved. His hand shot upward, reaching for my ankle. I barely had time to react. I jumped back, stumbling onto the pavement. The reflection shuddered, rippling violently. Then another hand emerged. Josh grabbed my arm. "Run! Go!" We took off across the parking lot. Behind us, I could hear more footsteps, more whispers. The things were crawling out of the puddles. Not just one, not just two, dozens. All of them looked like us, and all of them were smiling. The highway was ahead. If we could reach it, maybe, just maybe, we could escape. Josh's voice was strained. "We need a car. We need..." He cut off. I followed his gaze. A gas station. Neon lights buzzed above the entrance, flickering slightly. A lone car was parked by the pumps. It was running. The driver's side door was open. Josh looked at me. "That's a trap, right?" I didn't care. We sprinted toward it. The car's engine rumbled as I slid into the driver's seat. Josh barely had time to close the passenger door before I hit the gas. The car lurched forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw the copies standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching us. They didn't chase us. They didn't have to, because just as we hit the highway, the radio crackled. A familiar voice came through. It was mine. "Emergency alert." Josh and I locked eyes. The voice continued. "Avoid reflections. Avoid still water." Then, "You can't run from us." The radio went silent. Josh whispered, "Dan, what if we're already..." I didn't let him finish. I just kept driving. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark. The car's headlights barely cut through the night, casting long shadows on the cracked asphalt. The gas station disappeared behind us, swallowed by the distance. But the voice on the radio still echoed in my head. My voice. "Emergency alert. Avoid reflections. Avoid still water. You can't run from us." Josh sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his hands gripping his knees. He hadn't spoken since the radio went silent. I didn't blame him. I kept my eyes on the road, forcing myself to focus. "Keep driving. Don't stop. If we could put enough distance between us and that place, maybe, just maybe, we'd be okay. But deep down, I wasn't sure distance mattered anymore. The highway was eerily quiet. No other cars, no street lights, just the low hum of the tires against the pavement and the rhythmic creak of the suspension. Josh finally exhaled. Where are we even going? I didn't know. I hadn't thought that far ahead. We just needed to get away. But how far was away when the thing chasing you wasn't in a place? When it was in reflections, in water, in your own damn face staring back at you. I shook my head. We keep driving until we see people. A town. A police station. Something. Josh shifted. And what do we even tell them? I didn't answer. I wasn't sure we could tell anyone. Would they even believe us? Hell, would they even be real? Josh stared out the window. What if we already? The radio crackled. Both of us tensed. A burst of static filled the car, hissing like white noise. Then, underneath it, a drip. Josh reached for the dial, but before he could touch it, the static shifted. The voice returned. My voice. You're going the wrong way. I slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched. The car fishtailed before coming to a violent stop in the middle of the road. Josh was breathing heavily. Jesus, Dan. I ignored him. I gripped the wheel, my pulse hammering in my ears. The radio was off. The car wasn't even tuned to a station, but the voice was still there. Spoke again. Turn around. A lump formed in my throat. I didn't move. Josh looked at me, his face pale. Dan. I swallowed hard. It's trying to mess with us. Josh hesitated. What if it's not? I turned to him sharply. What? His knee bounced anxiously. What if we are going the wrong way? I didn't want to consider that. Couldn't. I put my foot back on the gas and kept driving. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. The road stretched on endlessly. No signs, no exits. Just an unbroken line of cracked asphalt disappearing into the void. Josh kept checking his phone. No service. No GPS. I clenched my jaw. We should have seen another car by now. Josh nodded slowly. The headlights cast long beams across the road, illuminating only what was directly in front of us. But something about the distance felt wrong. Felt like we weren't getting anywhere, like the road was looping. Josh sat up suddenly. Look there. I followed his gaze. Up ahead, on the side of the road, a car, a black sedan. Its driver's side door was open. My stomach twisted. That's the same car from the gas station. Josh exhaled sharply. No way. We've been driving for. I cut him off. I'm not stopping. I gripped the wheel and pressed harder on the gas. The car sped past the sedan. I didn't look at it. I didn't look at what might be inside it. I just kept driving. But Josh turned his head, and he went rigid. I didn't dare ask what he saw. He didn't say. But when I glanced at his reflection in the side mirror, his eyes weren't moving. They were wide, unblinking, fixed on something I couldn't see. I reached over and shook him. Josh, he blinked rapidly, his breathing sharp and uneven. We need to stop. I shook my head. No, we don't. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Tight, too tight. Dan, we need to stop. Now. His voice wasn't his anymore. It was wet. I turned slowly. Josh was staring at me, but it wasn't Josh. Not anymore. His skin was damp. His eyes were glassy. His fingernails dripped water onto the seat. My breath caught in my throat. I whispered, Josh. He smiled, and his voice, my voice, spoke. You should have turned around. The car jerked violently. I ripped my arm free and slammed my foot on the brake. The tires screeched. The car skidded sideways. I barely had time to register the reflection in the rearview mirror. Josh, the real Josh, was still in the passenger seat, mouth open, eyes wide, horrified. I looked back at the thing in front of me, but it was gone. The seat was empty. Water pooled where it had been. I gasped for air, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Josh was shaking. What the hell was that? I couldn't answer, because I didn't know. All I knew was that we had to get out of here. Now, I put the car in drive, and then the radio came back on. A final message. Emergency alert. Final notice. Reflections are compromised. There is no escape. Josh and I stared at each other. Then slowly, the screen on the dashboard flickered. A camera feed appeared. Live footage of us sitting in the car. But something was wrong. Josh wasn't moving, and I wasn't either. because the versions of us on the screen, they weren't real. They were just sitting there, smiling. The screen went black. The car engine died. And then, from somewhere outside, we heard a drip.